It's Friday once again, and I'm back answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers.
You are Locked On Panthers, your daily Carolina Panthers podcast. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome into another edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, the part of the Locked On Podcast Network. I'm your host, as always, Julian Council, talking Carolina Panthers with you every Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, and yes, of course, Friday, your team every day. That's our motto here on the Locked On Podcast Network. Thanks for watching the show on YouTube and listening wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Be sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council. Why? Because on Fridays like today throughout the offseason, I'm right here answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions. All you got to do is either at me or DM me over on Twitter at Julian Council or at me over on Blue Sky, also at Julian Council, to get your questions in for next week's edition of the weekly Friday mailbag right here on Locked On Panthers. Today's episode is brought to you by FanDuel. Right now, new customers can get $200 in bonus bets when your first $5 bet wins. We're back again for the weekly Friday mailbag, a Memorial Day weekend edition of the weekly Friday mailbag. Hopefully everybody is traveling safe wherever they're going, if they're going over this holiday season. And if not, hope you enjoy your time at home and I hope you enjoy today's show. So got a couple questions, of course, like we do every week. And we'll start off with Dill the Pickle. That's his Twitter handle. That's how he's going by, which is totally fine, I suppose. But he has a question about Jalen Coker, Xavier Legette, and just the role that those guys are going to play, mainly Coker this upcoming season in Carolina, which I did talk about a couple of days ago when looking at the depth chart post-draft, trying to figure out what will be Jalen Coker's role this upcoming season in Carolina. But Dill the Pickle saying there's been a lot of discourse around Jalen Coker and Xavier Legette, especially in terms of fit, with some suggesting they bring similar skill sets but execute differently. With T-Mac now in the fold, there's this growing narrative about an odd man out, which you touched on in Monday's episode. But here's what I'm wondering. In a league that fully embraces specialized roles for running backs, whether it's third down backs, change of pace guys, or short yardage specialists, why isn't there more room for that kind of roles clarity with wide receivers? Couldn't someone like Coker carve out value as a situational or third down receiver rather than needing to project as an every down wide receiver to stick? Well, yes. Yes, he can, and that is already how football works here in Carolina and throughout the rest of the NFL. There are personnel packages where certain guys are on the field during certain packages or depending on certain situations. That is already something that happens with the Panthers and happens with every team in the NFL. It happens in college. If they are in 12 personnel with one running back and two tight ends, they're going to have two receivers on the field. Typically, in that situation, you're going to want to have your best two blocking receivers out there and not a guy who's a liability, because you're likely going to be running the football in that situation. If you're 11 personnel, you got three receivers out there, and I'm thinking that possibly Jalen Coker, depending on the down and distance and the situation, time and score, could be out there. Certainly, if it's 10 personnel, four guys are out there, I would imagine Jalen Coker would get an opportunity. And if they're an empty five wide receivers out there, again, he could be out there, just depending on the time and score, the down and distance. So that is already something that exists here in Carolina. And I don't really feel like there should be any sort of like hand-wringing about Jalen Coker's role coming up this season. I think there should be excitement that there's legitimate competition in the wide receiver room. After a couple years ago, this was the worst wide receiver core in the NFL. And they failed Bryce Young as a rookie. And looking at last year, they got better. But now you have Adam Thielen back. You have Xavier Legette. You have Jalen Coker, of course. They brought in Tetairoa McMillan in the eighth overall in the draft. And then they also have Hunter Renfrow now, and excitement about that after listening to what our guy Q Myers from Locked On Raiders had to say on the show yesterday. They also have Jimmy Horn Jr., David Moore. There are far more guys on this roster in that position group who actually have an opportunity to be able to do something this upcoming season and help out Bryce and elevate this offense that there have been in a decent amount of time here in Carolina. So I'm not really all that concerned. I'm just curious how it's going to play out. So I don't think there's going to be an odd man out. I think he's going to be on the roster. He certainly earned it after what he did last season. I'm just curious of how big is his role going to be, because when you draft someone 8th overall, well, you want that guy to play ahead of the, albeit proven, undrafted free agent from a year ago. You want the 8th overall pick, the guy you invested in, to be getting his snaps. You want to see your first round pick from a year ago, Xavier Legette, to be getting more snaps than the undrafted guy. Adam Thielen, we'll see, and maybe his role is going to be diminished this upcoming season as he's going to be 35. You don't necessarily want a 35-year-old receiver. It's not like it's Larry Fitzgerald, but you don't want that guy being your top receiver right now. And the hope is that Xavier and T-Mac can be that, and then Jalen Coker continues to play the way he played last year and that he can elevate his play this upcoming season. And then you have Hunter Renfrow, who to me is kind of a wild card, depending on how he's able to bounce back after having 2 rough years where he didn't feel right in Las Vegas, sitting out last season, and now coming back to Carolina. So just, we'll be fine. Everything's gonna be okay. I don't think there should be any concern. But yes, what you're asking about certain roles, that has already been happening for years. So I appreciate the question. Mike and Dustin, basically same question. Mike says, or asks, is it unrealistic to expect the Panthers to sign a veteran at cornerback and safety? I think we've made enough moves to win the division. She would love, I don't know, it said she'd would love, but would love Justin Simmons and Asante Samuel Jr. Justin Simmons does feel like something that would make a lot of sense, rather, just considering he has experience in this scheme dating back to his time a couple years ago in Denver, albeit it was only 1 year, but Josie Jewell was only in that scheme 1 year for Jero Vero as a DC, and he was one of the Panthers' big free agent signings from a year ago. So Justin Simmons spent last season in Atlanta. I wouldn't be surprised if that happened. Asante Samuel Jr., maybe less so of something that Carolina is going to be going after. Maybe it could make sense just because he is a slot guy, right? And Shaw Smith-Wade did start late last season in the slot before getting injured. And Asante Samuel has more experience, so why not bring in another veteran player who can play that? Look at it right now. Not quite sure who would be behind Shaw Smith-Wade at this point in time there at that nickel slot corner. Dustin asking if the Panthers try to make another free agency move on the defensive side. Do you think it will be secondary or a veteran edge rusher to guide our young bucks from the draft? I don't think they're going to get an edge rusher at this point in time. I would think it would be secondary because that's where the needs really are, especially at safety, and trying to add another starter in that room and looking at it as a trio of starters. And I would say right now, Trevon Merrick and then Damani Richardson would be 2 of the 3 at this point in time. Certainly could be Lathan Ransom, the 4th-round pick from Ohio State the Panthers just took last month in the draft, but I do think they'd want to add another veteran in that room to be someone who can actually go out there and start above wanting to go out and sign another edge rusher in there. They want to get guys. I mean, they already have DJ Wonnum and Pat Jones, who are vets. I mean, they've been playing in the league for 4 years respectively. So they're veterans at this point in time. They're on their second contracts. They don't need to have anybody older than that to show Nick Scorton and Princey Uman-Mielen the ropes in the NFL. What they need is those guys out there playing snaps and not having some old vet taking some of those snaps from them. And it'd be better if it was like the NBA, where you look at the Hornets, they got Taj Gibson is on the team, who's on the team this past season. I went to one game and I was like, is that Taj Gibson? Why is he here? And he didn't play. And he was in his sweats, had like a towel wrapped around his neck, clearly was not going to play. And that was a game where like LaMelo Ball didn't play, Miles Bridges didn't play. None of the guys that you would pay money to go see play for the Hornets were out there on the court that night. And then here's this guy, Taj Gibson, just collecting a check. Why is he in there? As a veteran presence. So it's a little bit different. In the NBA, you can kind of use a roster spot on that, where in the NFL, they don't really want to be wasting them. And if you're going to, it's going to be like that backup quarterback, which is like why Andy Dalton's here, even though he can help you, especially if it's week 3. But at edge rusher, I don't know if that's what they're trying to do. Maybe somebody in a practice squad. I think Jordan Matthews kind of was that last year. And because of the injuries, he actually had to be on the active roster, maybe more than they wanted him to a year ago. So it's possible that they do that. But I would look at somebody to be one of those practice players they have in as a veteran. But really, they already got their vets on the roster, and you want to see those guys, the young bucks, as you call them, out there playing more so than having to sit back and learn. Not necessarily what you're saying, but just kind of my thoughts there. All right, take a quick pause, come back and answer more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. The NBA playoffs are in full swing, and every night delivers highlight-worthy performances, major momentum shifts, and can't-miss moments. Whether it's a game-winning shot or a breakout player, there's never been a better time to get in on the action. FanDuel makes it easy to stay in the game before tip-off and live with player props, performance trends, and same-game parlays. Fans have more ways than ever to play smart and win big. If you think that Anthony Edwards is going to continue to carry the Minnesota Timberwolves to the NBA Finals, well, why not back it up with the same game parlay new to FanDuel? It's the perfect time to sign up. Head to FanDuel.com and place your first $5 bet. If it wins, you'll get $200 in bonus bets. Make every moment more. FanDuel, official sports betting partner of the NBA. Answering more of your weekly Friday mailbag questions here on Locked On Panthers. Now over to Jake, who says or asks, if you could choose one offensive and one defensive player to make the Pro Bowl this coming season, besides Bryce Young, as that's the obvious answer, who would you choose? He says, personally, I would take Ike Ekwonu on the offense to truly establish himself as the franchise cornerstone, and Nick Scorton on defense to have a Jared Verse-like rookie season. Yeah, Nick Scorton, that is a pick that I would have loved to have had, but Jake, you already took my pick. You already eliminated Bryce Young, and I would not have taken Ike as a Pro Bowler as long as he plays as well as he played last year and then even takes another step forward. I'm good there. Taylor Moton's never been a Pro Bowler, and he's been a guy who's earned a significant amount of money to be the starting right tackle in Carolina and has another season. Hopefully there'll be many more after this season, depending upon how things play out. But you can have a solid tackle and they never go to the Pro Bowl, and you know, like, that's a good player and you're willing to reward them, which they've done with Taylor. And we'll see with Ike if they want to follow suit with some of these recent former first-round picks who've gotten their fifth-year option exercise, and later on that offseason, they have seen a contract extension handed to them, that being Christian Darrisaw with the Vikings, Andrew Thomas with the Giants more recently, to have those situations play out for them in the NFL. But as far as my choice here, since I can't take Ike, I can't take Nick, and I can't take Bryce Young, of course, offensively, I'm going to say Tetairoa McMillan. What about having a Malik Neighbors type of season? And Malik Neighbors was a Pro Bowl alternate last season. It counts all the same in my book. It's not like they're playing a real game anymore, and it's not like it mattered whether they're playing a game or not. But I would take that kind of a year from your top 10 pick there at that wide receiver position. I felt like all offseason they needed to add to the wide receiver position, that they should be trying to get a wide receiver number one, and none of those options really became available to them. DK Metcalf, that did not work out for them if it was even a possibility for the organization. Chris Godwin never even hit the market if you even view him as a number one receiver. And then looking at the other options out there in the market, they would do more to kind of raise the floor than to elevate the ceiling of that wide receiver room. And instead, on draft night, they surprised all of us, and they were able to get somebody who can raise the ceiling. And if Tet McMillan, or I guess T-Mac, he doesn't like going by Tet, T-Mac, Tetairoa McMillan, can go out there and can have a type of season that Malik Neighbors had last year, then you already have a top 15, maybe 10. I guess I got to count all the receivers in the league. Neighbors may already be in the top 10, but you already have one of the top dudes in the NFL at the wide receiver spot if he can put up that kind of a season. So he would be the answer for me. Offensive line wise, they've been totally fine without having Pro Bowlers as long as they're healthy. And I think that would be the same case this upcoming season. Running back doesn't matter to me. That's not really what wins and loses games in the NFL, especially for the Panthers. And then quarterback can't answer that one. So you kind of only left me with a pass catcher, and mine is Tetairoa McMillan. So yeah, that would be the guy who I'd want offensively to be a Pro Bowler for Carolina this upcoming season. And I think that would lead to great success for the team. And then defensively, since I can't take Verse, I'm not going to take Uman Mielen. I'm not going to take Wonham. I'm not going to take an edge rusher. I'm going to be a little bit more creative. JC Horn would be an obvious pick, but I think that's going to happen again, probably if he's healthy. Mike Jackson would be great. At safety would be cool. I think, though, the defensive line was such a disaster last year that you need Derrick Brown to come back in here and play at a Pro Bowl level like he did back in 2023. So that would be my choice defensively. He's already someone that this organization has pinpointed as one of its franchise pillars. They paid him a ton of money last offseason. Unfortunately, he got hurt week one, and you saw how it all fell apart without him. Now he's back in here. Ashawn Robinson's around him. You have Shai Tuttle in the backup role. They brought in Bobby Brown III. They have Turk Wharton here. This is a much better situation interior defensive line-wise than it was last year, even when Brown was heading into the season healthy coming off of that Pro Bowl. So he's somebody where you see these games can be won and lost in the trenches. And certainly, as I've stated a couple times this week, when the Panthers have had their winning seasons, it's because their offensive line has not been a complete disaster. When they've had their losing seasons, it's mainly been because the offensive line was a disaster. Last year, the offensive line was strong, but the defensive line was a disaster, in particular, the interior of the defensive line. So this is one of the most important position groups on the roster, and Derrick Brown clearly is one of the most important players on the team as well. So Tetairoa McMillan and Derrick Brown, those would be the two guys offensively and defensively who I think I would like to see for Carolina be a Pro Bowler. If I had to choose any of these guys, not being able to choose Bryce Young, it would be those two guys. I think that would really help this team move forward and contend in the NFC South this upcoming season. Nick now asking, between established talent and young potential, which position group, if any, gives you hope to be a top 10 or better unit this year, and why? Would love for it to be wide receiver. They're still too young for me to go out on a limb and say that. Running back, I think that's probably the simplest answer. It's not my answer, but it probably is the simplest answer because Chuba's coming off a 1,000-yard rushing season. Rico's coming off a 1,000-yard rushing season. You heard Marcus Mosher from Locked On Cowboys on Wednesday discuss Rico Dowdle, why he's not in Dallas, and what Carolina is getting in him as a player next to Chuba Hubbard in that backfield. They may have the best backfield in the NFL when you talk about those two running backs. That's the easiest answer to your question, Nick. And I'm looking at just the rest of the roster of the position group that I'm actually going to say that I think could be top 10 or better. And like it gives me hope is the offensive line. And why? Well, you brought back the top 8 from a year ago. And even when they had injuries to every single one of those starters last season, you still did not see the kind of drop-off that we saw in 2023, where it was cataclysmic, the kind of injuries that they had there in the interior. And the whole season fell apart because of it. But when Ickey went out last year, everything was fine. When Austin Corbett went out for the season, everything was fine. When Terrell Moton finally missed time for the first time in his career, everything was fine. Robert Hunt missed a game. Damon Lewis missed a game. Chandler Zavala stepped in. Brady Christensen stepped in. You saw Josh Nyman step in. It was all right. So with all 8 of those guys back, Cade Mays in there, so I guess your top 9 are back from a season ago. There is no reason to not believe that with continuity and health that this cannot be a top 10 unit or better this upcoming fall. To me, it's the best position group on the roster. Maybe running back is, but to me, as far as like of importance, I would far prefer whatever words I'm trying to say right now. I would rather the offensive line be a top 10 unit than the running backs, because that is where you win ball games in the trenches. So you look at last year, the Panthers offensive line finished 15th in PFF's pass blocking stat and then 7th in run blocking. You look at ESPN, they thought they were terrible against the pass, where they were 30th in their pass block win rate and then 10th in run block win rate. So looking just as a run blocking unit last year, they were a top 10 unit. Looking at pass blocking, they were either one of the worst or right there smack dab in the middle of the NFL as a pass blocking unit. I can agree there was a couple of games in there like Dallas where they were really struggling, so they can get better in that area. But with health and continuity, I think that's going to really elevate them to a top 10 unit this upcoming season. So the other answer would be running back. But to me, I think offensive line, like that's the group I'm looking at heading into this season as far as potentially being a top 10 or better unit in 2025. All right, take one more quick pause. I'll come back and answer the rest of your weekly Friday mailbag questions right here on Locked On Panthers. A few more questions here on the weekly Friday mailbag here on Locked On Panthers. Jamie, he asks, what specific things need to happen? Playing time, touchdowns, yards, interceptions, sacks, etc., for you to deem our NFL draft / offseason moves a great versus good versus mediocre success. Okay. As far as like the free agency moves, I mean, you need those guys coming in to start, right? Like, you need Bobby Brown III to be starting these games. You need, obviously, Javon Merrick to start and to stay healthy. Like, first and foremost, those guys coming in and playing games and not missing a ton of games, especially on the defensive side of the ball, which has been a huge issue the last couple of seasons for this defense. That, to me, that is like at a baseline makes them mediocre. Like, that's average as long as they play all these games. They're not missing time. But I don't really have the numbers in mind. Like, what matters is the team results. And if you bring in a player like Bobby Brown III, and the Panthers go from being the worst rushing defense in the NFL to a top 10 unit because of Derrick Brown coming back, but also adding in a key addition like that, that is a success to me. Like, that makes it great as an offseason addition. When you look at some of the draft picks, a little bit too early for me to kind of grade these guys out. And I did give like a grade post draft, but I did tell you back then that give it a couple years time after they play their first 3 seasons, and we'll do true draft grades. If I'm still doing this show at that point in time, I'll give you true draft grades as far as how those players ended up playing out. But like, when you look at it, like, Ted McMillan needs to be starting and needs to make a major impact at wide receiver this upcoming season. Nick Scorton, Prince Umana-Mielen, both of those guys, they need to be playing and need to make a big impact there at edge rusher. Trevor Etienne, don't really need a lot out of him. Lathan Ransom, probably need him to play. Cam Jackson, probably don't need a lot out of him. Jimmy Horn Jr., as a returner, but outside of that, probably don't need a lot out of him. So really, you're looking at the top 3 guys and then Ransom as guys who need to play. And if they're able to get out there on the field and play and not be a liability and make an impact, like, that turns out to be a good draft class for the rookie season for all those players. But as far as just the other offseason additions, like Rico Dowd will come in, play your role, be able to chunk off some of those 4 or 5 yard rushes like we were talking about with Marcus Bozier the other day. And like, that's good, man. That's solid to me. And I mean, defensively, those guys just got to come and play. Don't miss time. Elevate the defense, get that to not be the worst defense in the league. And kind of hard to say that they're not all going to be solid additions if that's kind of what happens. So I don't have the numbers, but I mean, playing time, it's just, play at the very least. That's what I need these guys to do. And then I brought up numbers-wise for Ted McMillan as a rookie. So I've kind of given those numbers, but everybody else individually, it's just kind of how the team results are at the end of the day that equates whether they had a successful offseason or not. Final question coming over from Jonathan. He says, why wouldn't a 6-11 team that only wins its conference games win the conference and make the playoffs? Well, pretty simple. And this is actually a question that I wanted to answer, even though you might roll your eyes at that. It's like, well, I mean, why even answer that question? Because the NFL Rules Committee was out this week, and the owners are meeting to decide whether they're going to ban the tush push, and that is going to stay in the league. The tush push itself, I mean, whatever. My problem mainly is the assisting the runner, which is exactly what that is. But I hate it more when you got a running back who's broke off like a 10-yard run. He's stopped by a couple of defenders, and then the offensive linemen come rushing down the field and start bulldozing. And even though the runner, who's been stopped by like 2 guys, clearly his forward progress has been stopped, there's enough time that's elapsed where the ref could blow the whistle, and they don't blow the whistle. And then here comes like this mass of 1,500 pounds to move these guys. And then they like carry them into the end zone. Like, I hate that. I think that's more dangerous of a football play than a tush push. Like, that is going to cause more injuries with these guys coming full speed downhill than it's going to be in one of those short yards where everyone's just packed up and pushing like that. That's what I don't like about the assisting the runner rule more so than the tush push. So I wanted to see it gone because I wanted to see that other play gone, not necessarily what the Eagles do. But also what was, put out there this week by the Lions was to change how they did seeding, where it was not going to be based off a division. It has to be when your division, you be in the playoffs, but it'd be based off of just what your final record was. And with that, then winning division would be great, but then if you don't have a great record, then it doesn't really matter. Well, right now, if you win your division, at worst, you're going to be the 4 seed. So if it was the way you're asking, Jonathan, where all you had to do is win all 6 of your division games, you go 6-11, and then you're in the playoffs, like, what's the point of playing any other game? Why put any other effort? Why not treat every other game as a preseason then if all you ever had to do was win those division games? And that kind of makes me think about like with the college football playoff and how they're trying to change that to where there's going to be automatic bids and top 4 teams in the SEC will get to go in there. So what's the point then of like Texas and Ohio State playing in the offseason? I guess there'll be the rankings at the end of the day that will decide where you're seated, but why even put out a ton of effort into those games if that's not going to determine whether you make the playoff or not? So that's kind of the same thing here in the NFL. If it was that way, why would they ever put any effort into any other games other than like, oh, you're a competitor, but you don't want to get hurt, right? So it'd make everything else the preseason, and it might as well just be a 6-game season if that's how it's going to be. But interesting question just based off of some of the other things rules-wise have been going on this week, and the Lions did actually retract their proposal to try and change the seeding, which is weird because they were the number 1 seed last year, and then they lost. Are they blaming – because I guess they had Washington, who was pretty good last year. They didn't get whoever the worst team remained. I don't know. I think winning your division should matter. I do understand the issue there is with like Minnesota and teams like that having a great season, having to go on the road. But it is what it is, man. Like that's just you got to still, if you're so good, go win those games. They won 13 games or 14 games, whatever it was. If you're a 13, 14 game winner, you should be able to go on the road and win that game, especially when the road game's in Arizona and there's more Vikings fans than Rams game fans in that stadium. That's just kind of how I thought and felt about it. Carolina's benefited from it. They went 7-9-1 and beat Arizona. And then they got bounced the next weekend in a game that were competitive against Seattle on the road. We've seen Seattle host New Orleans at like 8-8 and beat Drew Brees and the Saints. So we have seen how home field is obviously important. But we've also seen like the Giants when they had Eli, like 2 separate times, had to go on the road like throughout the playoffs and win 2 Super Bowls. So it is what it is. The onside kick is probably the other thing that's annoying to me. The fact that you have to declare it, that takes away from all the strategy and what makes it exciting, where a team can just decide, oh, we're going to do this right now and get you off guard and get the ball back instead of saying, hey, by the way, we're going to do an onside kick and try to get the ball back here in the second quarter. Like I think it's dumb the way NFL is doing it. But yeah, thanks to Jonathan for asking that question because I kind of wanted to use it, as you just heard, to discuss a couple of rules, things that was going on this past week here in the NFL. All right, it's going to wrap up this edition of the Locked On Panthers podcast, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, hosted by yours truly, Julian Council. Again, y'all subscribe or follow the show for free over on YouTube or wherever you listen to your favorite podcast. Make sure to follow me, Julian Council, over on Twitter and Blue Sky at Julian Council, where I'll be back with you next Friday answering your weekly Friday mailbag questions, either at me or DM me over on Twitter to get those questions into me or at me on Blue Sky to get those questions into me following this holiday weekend. And in the meantime, be safe, be happy, be whole. As always, keep pounding. And because Monday is Memorial Day and I'm going to be out of town for like the next 5 days, there will not be a show. But I'll talk to you guys on Tuesday, though.